Coach, hey, thanks for joining me today on this simple coach to coach interview. Appreciate you taking the time. I know it's probably getting down to that crazy busy season for you, so do appreciate you carving out a little bit for me.
Absolutely, Paul. It's a pleasure to join you and appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about Carroll University as well as our men's soccer program.
All right. Hey, I usually start out with a pretty broad question, and you take it wherever you'd like. What's your soccer journey been like to end up at Carroll University? And for those of you who don't know, which is why I'm particularly interested, you're a relatively recent hire at Carroll. So yeah, just trying to understand what your journey's been like and how'd you got there.
My piggyback question to you, Paul, would be how much time do we have on this podcast? No, all
There
jokes
are no
aside.
limits.
Yeah. Good answer. All jokes aside, I grew up in Racine, Wisconsin. So for those that are unfamiliar with Carroll University, we are located in Waukesha, Wisconsin. So just located outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin by about 10 minutes. We're a suburb of Milwaukee per se. Racine would just be about 30 miles south of Milwaukee, right? So for me, it's close to home. So just to kind of to answer your question, I played at University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. That's where I got my coaching start. Took a assistant role out in Colorado at a great school. I'll give them a plug, Colorado College. Spent 3 years there, had a great time. Had my first head coaching job in a school that transitioned NAI to NCAA Division III into the same conference as Colorado College. So I knew, the landscape. They happened to be in Denver, Colorado, Johnson and Wales University. And after 3 great years there, COVID was rough in many schools, many small private schools. Woke up to an email one morning in July during 2020, and they had decided to pull the plug on the institution. So at that time, they gave the students either a year to transfer out or to graduate. But the big $1 million question on my end and the other athletics and my colleagues was, hey, what's going to happen with athletics, right? And they got back to us the next day, and they decided to pull the plug on athletics immediately, right? So for me, I was fortunate where I was able to continue short-term staying in coaching. I was always involved in the club scene. I always
Mhm.
piggybacked that with my full-time college job, and spent 2 years in Denver and kind of maneuvered, or sorry, switched gears per se in career paths, and ended up getting into medical device sales for 2 years. But I knew having my first head coaching job pulled for me that I'd get back into it. So after a brief stint out of college coaching, I ended up finding my way back to the Midwest. I took a job in the MIAC at Concordia Moorhead. Spent a year there. Great community, great place. In a very hard soccer conference. Location wasn't pretty ideal. I was, young 30s and not married at the time and no kids. And, after a year and a half there, decided to pull the plug on the college coaching at that time and get a little bit closer to my family. In the last 2 years, I was up in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Still stayed involved with soccer. I was very fortunate last year to take a role with St. Croix Soccer Club, which is Stillwater, Minnesota, and coach their USL2 team. And, I knew that if I were to get back into college coaching, look, head coaching jobs are hard to come across. They're, far and few, especially if you want to be in a specific location. I knew I'd have to, align the stars would in terms of checking off quite a few boxes. And, I was fortunate to have a great experience with coaching St. Croix's USL2 team last summer. And that, the passion will always be there, always has been there for me from a coaching college standpoint. And Carol had opened up. I had knew the previous head coach. We were friends. We played together during the summer months. He was an alum of Carroll, had only coached at Carroll. So, had started talking small talk with him and ended up, hey, why are you not applying for this job? And one thing led to the next. And here I am a few months later and got hired in January. So to come full circle, I grew up in Wisconsin. Being at Carroll now, being around my family, I haven't lived in Wisconsin in 10 years. So it's been an enjoyable, short-lived ride so far in terms of being around my family again on a regular basis, having a proper, campus setup, playing in a terrific athletic conference. Might be a little bit biased, but location is phenomenal with being right outside the city of Milwaukee, about 75 minutes to 90-minute car ride to Chicago, and then an hour from Madison. So all the stars aligned, they connected, and here I am and enjoying every minute of it so far.
Whew. All right, so you have been literally all over, and I'm just curious? Isn't Johnson and Wales? Isn't that the school that has like different campuses? I know they have two on the East Coast that I am aware of that are Division III that compete.
Yes. So Providence is the hub per se, right? So that is their
Mm-hmm.
main campus. They did have a school in Miami, in Denver, and they still currently do have one in Charlotte. So the two that still exist are
Yeah,
Charlotte and Providence. And the
yeah,
Providence men's team actually just made the NCAA tournament this past year.
yeah, yeah,
But they wanted to expand out, and Denver, they had campuses in Denver, Miami, and those are the ones that they pulled the plug on
pull the
in
plug on. Yeah,
2020. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So yep. So still in the NCAA Division III side,
yeah,
Providence does have a men's soccer program.
yeah. All right, so this is the $1 million question. Were you hired for a purpose? Like, did they bring you on and say we want you to build the program so that they achieve a certain academic level, or are you there to win? Are you there? Was there anything specific there, or were they just looking for? They needed a head coach, and that was their process. Make
Yeah,
sense?
it does. And that was actually a big, and there was a multitude of variables in terms of me taking the job, but one of the big, crucial ones, the conversation I had with the AD who hired me, Mike Schulis, was, and this was the first time I've had two previous head coaching jobs, and no knock, the great schools. I had, great bosses at both schools previously, and the communities at both were phenomenal. But this was the first time in a head coaching job interview where it was. Hey, we want to know, how we can support you to help you win, right? And whether that's, however we can do that, we want to be aware of that, right? So that was the first time I had that conversation in an interview for a head coaching role. The previous two stops was, I wouldn't say this was specified, but it was, we certainly want to make sure that we fill rosters, we're filling beds,
Yeah, yeah,
giving guys a good experience, right? And making sure that guys are doing well in the classroom, in the community, they're graduating, but there was never a conversation around like, hey, like, what type of resources do you need provided to help you win and develop a winning program, right? So that was refreshing to hear on my end. Look, I mean, if for those that are familiar with Carroll, we're pretty spoiled here. I remind my colleagues, I remind my players of it. I'm fortunate to reap those benefits. We have a turfed stadium in game field, excuse me, but we also have a turfed training field as well. That's an auxiliary field.
mm-hmm.
So from a facility standpoint, I would say some of our facilities stack up there with some of the high end. Shouldn't say high end, but some Division I schools as well as some Division II schools that put a lot of money into them. And I know a lot of programs across the Division III realm also prioritize that. And I'd say Carroll did a wonderful job with that. And yeah, so back to your initial question, I would say we play in a very rigorous conference, the CCIW, where you have the likes of North Park University, who's usually a top 25 school.
Yeah,
North
yeah,
Central, Enzo has done a
familiar.
phenomenal job in his few years
Yeah,
there, right? And then Wheaton College, which was a rival of mine at UW Oshkosh through the years, and
mm-hmm.
throughout the years and year out, they have some very good players and some very good teams, and and you go across the board. Illinois Wesleyan won the conference tournament last year and finished sixth in the conference, right? So it's a conference where we want to compete. Carroll joined it 3 years ago, and I think for me it was refreshing to come in here to know that I would have the resources provided to help build a program, for success and to be able to get there. And certainly it won't be easy. We all want to win, right? But to know I have the backing of my AD as well as the athletic department was a refreshing one on my end.
I'm just curious. First of all, just the pictures online just looks like a beautiful campus. The fall must
Yeah,
be outrageous there.
yeah.
What do you play at Hartle Field? Is that
So
your
Hartle
game
Park would
field?
be our auxiliary field. So Schneider
Oh,
Stadium
that's your.
would be our stadium field, right? And then we do
Okay.
have adjacent to
Yeah.
Schneider, we have like I alluded to earlier, a
Yeah.
training field that is
Yeah.
used just
Yeah.
solely for
Okay.
training.
Okay. Yeah, because you're right there on campus. I'm
Hmm.
just looking at a map.
Yeah,
Always intrigued by that. Man, I wish I
absolutely.
could get out there. That would be a great Fields of Dreams. Um,
September is an amazing time to visit the Midwest, my
yeah,
man.
yeah. Um, what? How has the how have I'm assuming you gone through a spring, right? So you were in January 24. So you did a spring session. How did that go? How was the reception been by the guys on the team so
Yeah,
far?
I did get a spring with the guys. So, for me, right away when I took the job, I prioritized, getting each individual in front of me, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think, no matter what team environment I've worked in, corporate sales, I've worked in, a few different industries outside of coaching, as I talked about earlier. In any team environment is, hey, you got to have that trust factor, and whether it's a colleague, a boss, and that's really when you get, a buy-in from the group and you can work towards a common goal. So, I prioritize getting guys in front of me, getting to learn, really didn't, prioritize talking much soccer. It was, getting to know who they are as people. And I think, when you can get that down in terms of guys gaining your trust and you figuring out who they are, that's when, special things can really come to fruition. And certainly that takes time, right? I think, you certainly outside of the field, right? Guys need to see who you are as a person, right? Not just only on the field as a coach, but I prioritize getting to know them initially, and then I did have the NCAA Division III, as I'm sure you're well aware. Did just this past year change where we did have 24 training dates, and then one play
Mm-hmm.
date, right? So I got a full spring with them. They got to become familiar with my coaching voice, what in terms of what I expected on the field, but we also one of the second things I did outside of meeting with each individual was we went through core values. Like, what do we want as a team? How do we want to hold ourselves accountable? What are the standards of our program, right? How we want to represent our alumni, so on and so forth. And, so there's a lot of those pieces of, hey, what type of culture are we looking to build here, right? And I think like the day to day, that's your environment. Like culture takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. But those conversations are important to have, right? And those are things that we started on an early process, and we're still plugging away at them, right? And we'll continue to do that for years to come. But to establish that foundation was a big one for me. So, before we even started training, we had met several times as a team, and went through that and had a better understanding of like, what we wanted from one another and what we expected from one another. Right. And, so that was a big prioritization on my end on the field. I spent the first couple of weeks in terms of figuring out players' strengths, players' weaknesses. What type of player am I working with, right? How can that suit sort of system that I potentially want to have them play in? So that was the first few weeks of the spring, and then we started to focus on defending in a certain formation in terms of what type of principles. Same as attacking, right? It's talking hidden on principles there as well. And then so on and so forth. So that was if periodization did exist, and it does a little bit more in the spring season, non-traditional in college soccer than the fall. But we did, that's kind of how things aligned in terms of how our spring went, and then we finished with a play date to end the season, the spring season that is. And for me, it was. I wanted to see guys, consistently bring, the effort and play for their teammates, right, and bring it from just an energy standpoint. That's always a hard thing with college athletes is they're challenged and stressed in so many different avenues. So it's what's the mentality like each day, right? And I challenged them to bring it each day, and I thought they did a really good job, right? And we made significant strides in the 2.5 short months that I had with them in the spring, and guys are playing this summer, and I'm eager to get them back, and I know they're eager to get back, and we're looking forward to like every other school out there to get rolling with the fall season and see where things take us.
When do you start?
So August 16th. So next Friday, guys will
Wow,
report,
next yeah.
and then that following day we will start training. So which would be August 17th.
All right, so maybe I can get out there. Maybe I could fly out there
Yeah,
and
we can
train with
talk
you
offline and see what we
guys.
can make happen, Paul.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, if you could snap your fingers, how do you want Carol to play?
Yeah, that you asked $1 million question earlier. That would be $1 million question at the moment. As a lot of the guys that I have are internal, right? So I started in
Mm-hmm.
January. Think about recruiting cycle. That was expedited. Previous coach is a very good friend of mine, but didn't do me a ton of favors as he
Yeah.
resigned, stepped away in November, and he had knew leading up that was going to be his last year. So recruiting came to a halt for a little while. When I took over, I had one or two guys that were pretty much committed, but waiting to find out who the new head coach was. So I had one or two guys in the pipeline as is, but my incoming class for 2024, a very much expedited process, right? In terms of
Mm-hmm.
getting to see guys play, very minimal conversations, so this upcoming season, what does excite me, I will say, is a lot of the guys that do come back, we were predominantly freshman, sophomore with the group from this past
Mm-hmm.
season, right, which will now be sophomores, juniors. And it doesn't matter what sport it is from an NCAA standpoint, but you need upperclassmen, right? From a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, from maturity, you need those guys on the field, right? So to know that we have guys of predominantly sophomore and juniors and more upperclassmen this year, it excites me because they know the logistics, they know how the schedule operates, they know what the game feels like, what the game looks like.
Yeah.
And now for me, I can start to develop and bring in guys underneath that I can teach that and can learn that, right? And I can help those guys that are going to
Mm-hmm.
be upperclassmen be better leaders. And not that they weren't, right? The previous coach did a tremendous job here, but to continue to help them propel as leaders and build it. So this fall for me will be very much of still building off that foundation that we started this past spring, right? And I'd say if I'm being very frank and transparent, the next fall, 2025, will be, what I have pegged as quote unquote my first recruiting class, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we spent this past spring as a staff getting out, IDing players, getting guys on campus, getting them in front of us, learning about them as people, learning about their character. And then, we'll look to bring them back on campus this fall for a game and do the overnight thing and continue to learn about them, right? As we want to make sure as a staff, we're bringing in, always we want a good soccer player, but more importantly, we want someone who prioritizes, academics as well as a good person, right? Like any other coach in the NCAA, right? Or across college soccer for that matter. So, and that takes time, right? You don't get that overnight. You never get that right to a T. But you want to give yourself a chance to have the time to do that. And, so for this fall, look, we want to, what I prioritize in the spring, what I'll prioritize in the fall is as a coach, we can coach the defenders in the back line, and that's a mental makeup, right? And that's something that we spent quite a bit of time on. We'll focus on that largely in the fall. Not to say that we'll play we're going to sit in and look to counter, but it'll be a mix up of pressing and finding our moments of press. Obviously, you can only do that for a prolonged period of time, but we want to make things difficult on the opponent, right? And when you can do that, you keep yourself in games and create goal scoring opportunities. And you look at statistics; these guys were in the top 10 percentile last year of shots created throughout the match, right? So now, if you can keep opponents out of the goal, now you're not only giving yourself a chance, but you're in ball games, right? And that's our objective for this coming fall. And long term, look, like I was very fortunate to play at a program for UW Oshkosh where we made the field big. Our outside backs got forward. Our 7-11s became inverted. Our 9s and 11s were interchanging. There was fluidity. We were, keeping the ball. We were scoring goals. Like that's when the game's fun to me, right? And certainly that takes some time. And from a training standpoint, as well as identifying those guys that can do that. But on the flip side, I would say like you need guys that are willing to defend and 1v1 defending. And, I had a conversation a few weeks back with a gentleman, a friend of mine who coaches at Cal State LA, and they've obviously had some recent success. And, I have a very similar mindset. If a guy isn't willing to defend 1v1, doesn't matter what position, like they're going to have a hard time to see the field for my program. And that's something that we want to take pride in. And, let your guys up top be creative and you can, work with the back line to shore some things up and, not to give away everything, but that'll be a big prioritization this upcoming fall on our end.
Yeah. Do, do, where do you anticipate recruiting from? I'm always curious. New coaches, sometimes you're bound by like the geography and the nature of your school that is going to be, you're only recruiting within your state. Is it? And I'm not familiar with Carroll in terms of the student profile, but where will you be looking for players, and do you hope to expand that footprint if appropriate?
So if you look previously, we this past year we were about 30% international, and that I'm sure you're well
Oh
aware
wow!
that's creeping into the NCAA Division III realm, right? Which
Yeah.
you flash back 10 years ago, maybe not as much. So when I recruit domestic players, I'm making them aware of that, right? Because it's becoming more challenging to find themselves onto a college roster because not only are they battling for with domestic players, which are college roster spots are minimal, but now you have international players that are creeping in. And for me, I'm not opposed to recruiting anybody from anywhere in the world, right? For me, it's
Mm-hmm.
the big three things are, you prioritize academics, you prioritize being, obviously a good soccer player, but also the character pieces, right? And I'm no different than any other coach out there. Those are three
Hmm.
big pillars. But I think, like going forward, I will take a little bit more priority in recruiting, somewhat more domestically. And when I say that, we're just outside the city of Milwaukee, right? We're an hour to an hour and a half ride from, depending on where you're going, in Chicago. And then Minneapolis is about 4 hours away, which I have connections, having coached in a club there most recently. But also, might be really biased playing at a school like UW Oshkosh, where we were a similar makeup, right? So it's like that was I lived that, right, and I helped put
Yeah.
together some of those teams, and to know that the quality of soccer in Milwaukee and Chicago and Minneapolis, there's some very good youth players, and so we'll highlight those areas. We did that this past spring, and I think. Look, I'm not opposed to the international route. I think certainly we want to keep all options open. But being able to go see a player play, as well as get him in front of you, is a little bit telling, right? In terms of, I talked about that character piece, right? Where you can now, what happens to a kid when they go down 1-0 in a match? What's their body language like? How do they respond? How do they take coaching? How do they coach their teammates? Those are all big pieces to that character portion of it that I talked about and will continue to. That I'll never get right, but I want to make sure I can shore that up as much as I can, right? So the recruiting piece is one that I enjoy. I'll be fortunate to work with a club locally here that's involved in playing at the ECNL level. So, I'll be able to piggyback coaching a few of those teams, as well as recruiting at that level, which a lot of our matches will be in the Chicago area, Milwaukee area, as well as Minneapolis. So it's a no-brainer on my end to utilize those pipelines to,
Yeah.
bring in some of those kids. And I'd say, to answer your question as I'm veering here, a majority of our students that are domestic students are from the Chicago areas, as well as the Milwaukee area,
Hmm.
Madison area, and then the Fox Valley area, which is the likes of Appleton, Neenah, and Green Bay in Wisconsin. So
Hmm.
that would be our school profile in terms of demographic makeup.
Can can I just ask, is it something about Carroll that gets you, I mean, a pretty wide range of international students? I mean, it's not just see a kid from Barcelona, from the Netherlands, Norway. Like, is there something about Carroll itself that I know, like North Park, right, just has a real deep connection with
Mhm.
Sweden or somewhere.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
So
so is it?
yeah, I think, to me it was new, right? Look, I went from a public state school at UW Oshkosh, where we are predominantly Midwest kids, right?
Yeah,
Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, to now go into a Colorado college where, it's a hard school to get into. There's 10,000 applicants for 250 spots every year, right?
yeah,
And we recruit on an international scale there, and that opened my eyes. But it was, hey, 70% of that campus student body there is our full pay students, right? And that's a
yeah,
$70,000 school, and that price has probably gone up since I left, right? So
yeah,
not only do you need a good soccer player there, but you need someone who's able to afford $75,000
yeah,
a year, but also have the grades, right? And I couldn't touch a kid that was below a 3.8 or 32 ACT. That, like, the conversation was out the door if they weren't academically at
yeah.
that par, right? So going back to your question. Fortunately, the previous coach has some very stable connections with a few international agents, and
Hmm.
I do receive. It's pretty wild to me as I'm learning on the fly here, right? I do receive pretty frequently in terms of, I'll get emails from agents, and it'll
Uh-huh.
show, essentially a kid, his estimated budget in terms of what he can afford yearly at a school.
Right.
It'll give me his grades. It'll give me a highlight video. And then it's certainly, if I enjoy what I'm seeing, I'll let the agent know. He'll set up basically a video for me to have a conversation,
Hmm.
and then one thing leads to the next, right? So, I think it helps. I think North Park, historically has done a very good job with
Yeah.
recruiting on the international side, and they have some stronger pipelines. For me, it's we have a few different agents around a few different countries in Europe, and I'm still looking to establish those. And sorry, I shouldn't say establish, but make those stronger
Yeah.
connections,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
their job is to place kids, right? And like that's that's
Yeah.
that's their goal, right? And obviously it'd be nice to know which are the stronger kids, and all the highlights. That's the kids' best version of themselves, right? And then to know
Yeah.
that we're not all perfect. We all make mistakes. We all will in the soccer field in life, and it would also be nice to have those videos, right? But we don't get those, so so that's why I say a little bit. I will prioritize a little bit more on the domestic side, just because I can get a better idea of character, as well as what the
Hmm.
kid's about from a just from a soccer standpoint as well, because I can see them play multiple times, right? So, but no, there's also apps nowadays that you can go on, any coach, and I'm probably
Yeah.
giving away too much here, but you can hop on and scroll and see a kid's estimated budget. you can see their highlight video. If you like them, you select them, an agent will reach out to you. So it's quite fascinating as the landscape has changed significantly in probably the past 5 to 10 years now at the NCAA Division III level.
I will say too, right, just about your focusing domestically or regionally where you're
Hmm.
located. I mean, look, truth be told, right? Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, all that entire area, Iowa.
Hmm.
There's some great soccer players out there. I mean,
Absolutely.
for crying out loud, right? Like St. Olaf this year, right?
Yep.
Like it just, or yeah, this past year. So, just a lot of talent to be able to pick from. So it's not
Absolutely.
like you're in the middle of nowhere with
Right.
nothing, right? So
Yeah.
I'm always curious about the international thing because there's always something about the school that it was very intentional at some point to build
Mhm.
this connection overseas, and then it just sort of becomes this funnel for soccer players as well. So that's
Yeah, no,
always
I'm
always
still
interesting.
learning, and so we are very much our niche is on the health science side, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
offer postgraduate degrees on in certain different areas, and that doesn't translate. I shouldn't. A lot of those postgraduate programs don't. A lot of internationals won't go that route because
Mm-hmm.
the European Union they won't accept them, they won't translate, so they're
Yeah.
generally just coming for a bachelor's. So most of
Mm-hmm.
them are looking the likes of business, marketing, something along those lines that they can take back to Europe that'll transfer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or South America, Central, wherever it might come from, right? That they can utilize there, right? And, if they go to med school here, like in terms of, certificates that they're needing, that always won't
Mm-hmm.
translate to their home country, right? So they generally
Mm-hmm.
steer towards a generalized degree.
Yeah.
I'd say like just the quantity of guys that want to come to the States to play college soccer is growing, right? And that's why, I relate to not only domestic kids, but any kid out there is like how do you sell yourself and how do you stand out, because it's not easy, right? And you got to find little niches to make yourself stand out, not only on the soccer field, but your character and grades and so on and so forth, to be able to put a footprint on it and catch the coach's eye, because there's no shortage of good soccer players out there, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
worldwide. And now it's like, hey, like we want to make sure we get the character piece well, right, as well as guys prioritizing that they're coming here for a degree as well.
Mm-hmm. Too, this, I mean, this goes back years, but a friend of mine was the director of basically one of the directors at Barcelona, and we had talked about kids who go, right? The amount of kids who go try to become professional and don't even come close, and what happens to those kids, and that they don't have an avenue. And then thought was, oh, give them an avenue. They can go to college, right? Like, and come to the state. The idea was to get them to the States, and this was years and years ago. And I think there's a heavy dose of reality that's setting in to a lot of kids in Europe that it's a lot tougher to make it professionally, and so they got to figure out something else. And you know, most of Europe, your career ends when you stop playing because of that. Like, okay, I'm going to go to school. Well, your professional soccer career is over, and you really don't play competitively. And here they have the opportunity to go 4 more years and get a degree. Totally, totally
Absolutely.
makes sense for them. So, um, s- s- how many kids do you have coming in? I'm just curious because you came in so late, and how many recruits or how many guys do you have coming?
Yeah,
Um,
so
do you
I'll
have
bring in
spots
13
for?
guys. So we do have a
Oh,
reserve
nice.
program here.
Oh, you do.
I do have a full-time assistant, a graduate assistant, I should say, who's full-time with us. So basically, the athletic department, or sorry, the administration approached athletics, years back, and Carol's in a very healthy, financial
Hmm.
situation, and that's the scary part about a lot of private, small schools, and I was a part of
Oh
that, right,
yeah.
at Johnson and
Oh
Wales,
yeah.
is with athletics having to drive that.
Yeah.
But I'm given, it's somewhat generalized, but the number that they'd like me to be between is 40 and 45, right? So you'll see a little bit on my end, a little bit of a larger recruiting
Mm-hmm.
class each year. But this year we're bringing in 13 guys, so we'll end up with 44 guys at training camp next Friday on day one. But each year that'll change, right, as we go through it. But I'd say, given, the number that I've given and having full-time help, our number will be anywhere between 10 and 15 on a yearly basis in terms of guys that we
Hmm.
bring in.
That's a big. So that makes sense if you have a developmental squad, because
Hmm.
that was a thing I noticed. I was like, man, that's a big roster, and I
Hmm.
wasn't sure. Now everything's I think sort of getting right, but I don't know if this was part of the whole COVID thing or not. But if you have a developmental squad, that makes
Hmm.
total
Hmm.
sense. Um, what what do you think? What do you think your first couple weeks of preseason are going to look like? You mentioned focusing mostly on defense, right? Because it's probably the most controllable thing. And
Right.
um, but uh, how are you going to get the guy? What are you going to do to keep building? I'll just say sort of a culture that you want to build and get everyone bought into it. That
Right.
makes sense.
It does. Mentality, right? I think
Hmm.
mentality is huge, right? Especially when they have so many, um, there's so many different things outside of soccer, that when they get to college, right? Distractions is what I'm getting at, and it's important to be able to bring it on a daily basis, right? At training, in games, with their teammates from a social standpoint, with school, they're again being stretched so much, but a winning mentality. And that's something that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, right? It's the small, no different than our real lives, right? It's the small wins that we have in real life that generally lead to the large wins, right? Every team says, hey, I want to go to the postseason. Every team says, hey, I want to beat the top dog in our conference. But what do those, day-to-day tasks look like for you to get there, right? So, we had a meeting, we talked about goals, and this was another thing when I first took over, and these guys want to play in the postseason. So if that's the case, right, and that was what I was hoping they would say, and assume they would say, it's like, okay, well, how do we get there, right? What are the day-to-day approaches to get there? So these guys did a great job where we had a high percentage of guys attending lifts with our strength conditioning coach in the spring, sticking to the strength packet and conditioning packet during the summer months. I highly encourage them to find a summer team that they continue to challenge themselves and put themselves in uncomfortable situations on their soccer team where they might not be the best player, right? Because that is only going to benefit them as a player, but it's also going to help our team when I get them back, right? So for me, my focus is, as mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, is certainly the defensive side will be one that we focus on from a coaching standpoint, but I want to make things competitive. I want guys to get after it. I want to look, like, life is hard. You got to choose your heart. I'm big on that. It's hard being on a losing team, but it's also hard being on a winning team, right? So it's you got to pick which one you wanted to simply be a part of, right? And now what's the approach? And now we got to hold standards to get there, right? And if these guys want to talk postseason, it's in the fall, like we're gonna lift one day a week on top of having film multiple 2 days a week on top of training pretty much every day, and we'll have one day off like every other NCAA team does a week, but they're long days and they're stretched, right? And are you committed to that? And that's a mentality, right? It's
Yeah.
very easy to, it's very, sorry, hard to get up at 5 a.m. for a lift, right? Or if you have, some guys have morning practices. We'll do a morning session one day a week this fall. But I've been a part of programs that do it every day, right? And it's very hard to get up and mentally prepare yourself for that. But that's where I challenge guys. It's like, it's hard to do that, but that leads to wins, right? But it's also hard not to do that because now your team doesn't win and now you're losing, and that's also hard, right? So
Yeah.
it's the mentality, but now it's, hey, can we be consistent with that, right? Can we consistently, when we do show up, that's from body language to interactions to being there for our teammates, and we're gonna have every team hits highs and lows, and when we hit our lows, it's do we have a majority of guys helping push through, right? And whether that's with leading by action or leading communicating or pulling guys aside when they're, making, dumb decisions off the field or on the field and having adult conversations. And, so the mentality piece is a massive one for me. Right. And that's how, where I see, how we make that jump in terms of, cause we finished towards the bottom of the pack in the CCIW this past year. Right. And, for me, I want to get guys in that are committed to a standard of, if we want to play postseason soccer, what happens in between, traditional season and non-traditional, being that winter period as well as summer periods, like that's just as big as what happens during the fall and spring, right? And I need
Yeah.
guys that are disciplined and mature enough, to make those decisions to consistently, stick with it and push guys. And we're all going to have rough days, but my goal as a coach is to get the guys in place that, when guys are having a rough day, to, get guys around them that are going to, uplift, motivate, inspire. And, I don't think that's just like any soccer program or team that I'm around. I think like that goes back to my, my friend circle and my relationships in my life. And, just pumping on guys is like, look who you surround yourself with. Are they people that are, are they go-getters? Are they constantly,
Mm,
things are, going to be tough. I'm going to have hard days. Are they there for you in those moments, right? To uplift you. Or if, you're acting a certain way that you shouldn't be, are they going to pull you aside and have a hard conversation and hold you accountable? So, just a lot of things, approaches from a mentality standpoint are going to be, prioritized, and they already have been, but it's stuff I
mm,
constantly talk about with our kids. But it's no different than, the way I live my life and the people I surround myself. Like that's
yeah.
what I want. And I want to be around guys that, want that. Right. So, that's a crucial one to it, as the season's a long one. And, again, there's a lot of lows, there's a lot of highs, everything in between. And you got to know how to manage those. Right. And you got to, when you're the hunter, right, you got to know how to dig a little bit deeper. And then when you're the hunted, being at the top, like that's also very hard to maintain that, right? Because you feel like you made
Mm,
it. So just understanding that, having those conversations,
yeah.
there's no secret sauce, but I think consistency of, being able to have that mental makeup of showing up for your teammates. And when you're, now that you showed up, now like show up to work, right? So that's something that I pump constantly on these guys.
But as my mom would tell me, hang out with losers, you end up a loser.
Right.
That's sort of the
Show me your friends,
uh,
I'll show you who you are, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly,
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
She always cut
Yep.
to the chase, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Coincidentally, she would always say that when I would, hey, introduce her to a friend of mine that she didn't warm up to. She would
Yeah.
make sure she would tell me that.
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
mean, when you're a high schooler or you're a college kid, it's,
yeah,
goes in one ear out the other. But,
yeah,
I
yeah,
constantly hit it, and I use certain analogies, and, some it'll, stick with a little bit sooner than others. But the
yeah,
more we can get
yeah,
on board with that, the better off the program
yeah,
is, right?
yeah. All right, so looking at your schedule, what is the what would you look at and realistically say this is our first this is our first real test to see how much progress we've made?
Yeah. I would say, certainly, from a conference standpoint, the conference didn't do us any favors, as, we open up against,
Open.
North Central, which, is
Oh
no
yeah,
cakewalk, right? As Enzo
yeah.
has done a great job. And I go way back with Enzo with his days at UW Platteville, my days at UW Oshkosh.
Hmm.
But I would say, certainly we hit the road right off the bat. We go up to, my old stomping grounds, Minnesota,
Hmm.
and, we'll go to Minnesota Morris. And, and then we face a very good team in St. John's, who year in, year out
Yeah,
is in the mix for the MIAC in terms of being in that postseason. And that'd be a good test right off the bat, right, for us in terms of seeing, what our makeup is. And then, from there, as I don't have my schedule in front of me, but, right away roll into, seeing the likes of Loras College, of UW Eau Claire. And,
hmm,
these are things outside of our slate, right? So,
yeah,
there's always a balance, but it's, you know, we're our conference. There's no cupcakes, right? As Illinois Wesleyan
yeah,
finished sixth in the conference and won the conference tournament. And, that just goes to show that they're, very well coached. And, you don't have the most talent in the world to win games, right? And that's soccer across the board, right? That's the beauty,
yeah,
and cruelty
yeah.
of soccer, right? But, yeah, I would say, certainly the first few, non-conference slates, we'll see what we're made of a bit. But, we do open up against North Central as our first conference, opponent. And, we all know that, that won't be an easy one.
Which one's your grudge match? Like, which one's the game that everybody's like, just it's a you don't like each other?
I would say, and look, I'm newer to the conference, newer to the school. I'd say years past. So, Carroll used to be in the CCIW years past. They went
Uh-huh.
to the Midwestern Conference, and now 3 years ago joined the CCIW. Right. So, St. Norbert's used to be a very, a big rival per se. We don't play them this year, but historically that's been a big one for them. For me, I would say, battle of the two Wisconsin schools. So there's two Wisconsin schools in the CCIW. It's us and Carthage, College, which happens to be in
Yeah.
Kenosha, which is, right where I grew up. And, so I would say that would be one that we would highlight, where it's like, hey, we want to make a stamp on, being, and there's only two schools in Wisconsin, but that would be one where they're right down the road. They're in our conference.
Yeah.
One where we want to put a stamp on of being in that school, that lone school in Wisconsin that, is able to put a stamp on the conference.
Yeah. Very interesting. So do you have any Do you have any predictions yet, or are you still trying to sort that out? Where do you think what do you
Yeah.
think you're gonna what do you if you could snap your fingers in the ideal world, where do you think you end up in the
Yeah.
CCIW?
I think, look, and what I've told the guys and we've chatted about is I think an attainable goal would be there's 9 schools in our conference, 6 make the conference tournament. There's no reason that, we shouldn't be, pushing for a conference tournament spot, right? And
Mm-hmm.
especially with a younger-ish group, I think, look, we want to build a foundation and that would be a great starting point. But, every team in our conference is hungry to get there just as much as
Yeah,
us, right?
yeah.
So easier said than done. But I think, just the prepness in terms of what the guys have done this past spring. I'd say about 80% of the guys found themselves into some sort of summer structured league this past summer, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
challenging themselves, stepping outside their comfort zone. That's going to help us, when we come back next Friday and start training next Saturday. But I would say, yeah, a goal that I have in my head, a goal that I've relayed to the guys is, we want to be one of those 6 teams playing the conference tournament and see what happens there, right? As, I think, the proof is in the pudding with Illinois Wesleyan, where they're the number 6
Yeah,
seed
yeah,
last year and went on to win it and receive the AQ for the CCIW last year, right? And
yeah,
look, not to say that that's what we're going to do, but I think you want to give yourself the opportunity to get in there and see what can happen, right? And I think that's a very attainable goal, and that's not to sell the other schools short in our conference because there's very good competition all across the board, but that's one that we have our eyes set on in terms of a goal that we want to set out for this fall. And look, if we fall short, we fall short, and we continue to move forward. But I would say that's one that we're chomping at the bit to get an opportunity to be one of those 6 schools in the conference tournament.
not to say that that's what you're going to do, but with Illinois Wesleyan, at least it shows
Mm-hmm.
what could happen, right? It'd be one
Absolutely.
thing if the league's always dominated by the same 2 or 3, and that doesn't matter. But that they just prove that this is something that's a reality. You get into the tournament, all bets are off at that point,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you're just
Yeah,
battling
I mean,
for.
you've seen postseason soccer, man. Everything's played in between
Yep,
the 18s. Guys are, the
yep,
nerves are there. Guys are afraid to take
yep,
risk. You never know.
yep,
So that's why you want to get in, and you never know
yep.
what can happen. And especially in the Midwest in November, you get 30 mile per
Oh
hour
yeah.
winds, maybe snow. It's like just get in and give yourself an opportunity, man. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the goal there on our end.
Yeah, very good. All right, Coach. Well, I will be watching. I'll definitely keep an eye, and maybe we can connect after the season, and maybe give me an assessment of how it all went. But wish you guys all the best. Wish your team all the best, and as you tackle the preseason, I'll let you know when I land. And I am extra large, so all the gear you're just gonna want to make sure it's an extra large.
Hey,
But
we're always looking
um,
for super fans, Paul. But no, on
yeah,
my end, thank you. As I told you,
yeah,
offline before we started, I'm a D3 men's soccer guy in and out, D3 soccer guy as a whole, men's and women's.
yeah.
But I think the platform that you've created for D3 soccer is pretty phenomenal, right? And
Thank
I
you.
applaud you and can continue the great work. And I look forward to continuing to watch your interviews and keep pumping D3 soccer, man, because it's a good level and it's a very good
Yeah.
opportunity for a lot of those out there.
Thank you very much. Really do appreciate it. Thanks again. Wish you all the best. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Paul.